Is Microsoft a stock that is safe to hold at the moment, or are there unknown risks that you need to be aware of so you can protect yourself against potential downside in this stock? Stay tuned. We're going to continue right after the intro. Hello and welcome to yet another video from Bloomberg Capital. My name is Patrick and today we're going to be discussing the Microsoft stock. Now the stock has been running quite wild in this year. You can see it here in the chart that since March of this year, we had a staggering rally going from 340 to about 550, which is an insane run. However, what we have seen afterwards is a left translation in a cycle where you have a large leg to the downside, which is then followed by a failed high over here. So failing a high usually means that there is much more risk involved in the market, and this is what we will potentially see in the future. So I have also brought you Microsoft from 2018 because I think the stock is behaving very similarly to that year, where it also had a staggering rally. However, it did fail in that year. This year, we see the similar type of pattern. That is, however, much more weak than compared to 2018, which means that we could have much more downside coming ahead, and you need to be aware of that so you can protect yourself. Now, how can you protect yourself against that? Let's discuss this at the end of the video, but now let me show you what I actually mean with potential downside. Usually, when I look at charts, I like to take analogs. What does that mean? Well, charts, they behave similarly in a yearly cycle due to seasonality because of fund flows. People tend to buy the similar type of stocks depending on when they get their salary, when they get their bonuses. So there is always a rhythm in the market that you can see. And for us, it's very important on how the rhythm behaves on certain junctures in the time of the year. So at any time of the year, the price pattern has an expectation, and we need to see if that expectation gets fulfilled or not. So let me show you here this peak in Microsoft that was achieved around the end of July in 2018. There we formed an intermediate type of a high, and if I now form a range into that, you can see that price was struggling quite a bit to reach above. We actually, in fact, formed a head and shoulders pattern here, which is a topping type of a formation for the local trend that then trended downwards with a little bit of, I would say, a bigger sell-off. That was 12% at that time. And now, since Microsoft is much more volatile, we could see much more risk. You can see we already corrected 10% to the downside. However, this end of July peak remains prominent, and we did form a lower high in October of this year, and you can see that there it was achieving a higher high. So if the same logic applies, we are seeing the same pattern that we also did see in 2018, especially with the July peak and the October peak. But now we are witnessing that the high of July is actually a higher high than the high of October. Here we did see a lower high in July and a higher high in October, which means that this pattern was stronger. There was more buying into this pattern, and here it was more selling. So more selling would mean that investors are currently not really interested in the Microsoft stock, and that's why they sold it off. Now, you had a mild decline, I would say, from the shoulders high, but here we see the pattern is much more volatile. Okay, it is more volatile to the upside. It is also more volatile to the downside. What if we now get a larger type of decline, because now this pattern is weaker, so we should see a lower high form to analog this head and shoulders high, which then should be followed by about 17% of a decline that we saw here. Okay, so that tells us what we can expect next in Microsoft, which would mean that my expectation is a lower high to form just because of the analog, this forming a double-headed type of a head and shoulders pattern where this acts as a secondary head and then another smaller feeble rally as a shoulder, which then leads us to a potentially bigger decline. So if we assume we rally to the 50% of this leg to the upside, which would mean that we would about touch this trend line and then go down by 17% as we did in 2018, this would bring us to 436. However, we expect this pattern to be a little bit weaker, so it is possible that we test the midpoint of the gap, which would come in at 408, and if we take that, the psychological level would be the $400 level, which also coincides with this channel that Microsoft has established here, which is this uptrending, upsloping channel where we could see some short-term weakness inside. And I also have drawn the short-term green channel, which was the base that formed around here in the lows of 2022. So it is possible that we expose more weakness, because if you compare the distance between these lows, it is possible that we make a less of a distance from this low compared to this low, because this pattern is weaker, and therefore we could have a small rally here as well, which potentially forms a new high. But then I would say we are in for an intermediate type of a top, because we are weakening to the upside. See how we can grind next to this yellow channel and how we are not even able to reach it. The next point would be not being able to reach it, which would be here, which is why I expect another high in the midterm. However, next year should be fairly negative. And this is something you need to know. So hedging yourself would mean that you could, for instance, trade an option around the highs of Microsoft. I don't think it is worth shorting the stock right here, but I would definitely look into taking profits here, and especially if the structure confirms and you have longer term holdings for I don't know how many years, for instance, it makes a lot of sense to maybe put options here just to be on the safe side, so you are actually hedged. The way you can actually do that is also by simply asking us in our channel in Discord. Link for that is down in the description. There we discuss more than 180 stocks with precious metals as well, like gold and silver, and also cryptocurrencies. We did recently call for the Bitcoin price high, and after that Bitcoin came down very low. This is something that we called in advance. So if you like to be informed like this, you definitely should check us out, and we can also discuss on how hedging strategies could work there and how you could execute them. I'm Patrick with Bloomberg Capital. Hopefully you liked this video. If you did, please like, share, and favorite and subscribe.